He was forced to wed an obese woman. What happened after shocked everyone. Montana, 1886. Early morning. Flames devoured the barn roof as Jed Harper crashed through the smoke, shielding his wife from the gunfire slicing the dawn. Bullets punched through the wood, splitting beams overhead. A voice outside roared, "Burn it all! They've got the map!" Jed grabbed Flora's hand. Her dress was streaked with ash, but her grip never faltered. Clutched to her chest was a leather folder. Not gold, not bonds, just ink and truth. Enough to ruin men. He pulled her to the far wall, kicked open the floor hatch. Smoke burned his lungs. "We're running out of time," she shouted. Jed looked back once. At the orange glow, at the shadows of men moving outside, and then down at her. Someone had betrayed them. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe blood. But he knew one thing. If Flora died tonight, it wouldn't be justice burning. It would be the future. He dropped into the tunnel, pulling her after him as the barn above them collapsed. 6 months earlier, Jed Harper hadn't cared if the sun rose or not. The ranch had gone quiet. Empty corrals, dry fences, bills stacked like tombstones on the kitchen table. After his mother passed and his father's debt buried them deeper each season, Jed gave up on asking life for anything. He drank mostly, rode fence lines with a dead stare, never visited town except to sell hides and buy more liquor. The Harper Ranch had once been called the finest spread east of the divide. Now folks just called it cursed. His father, old Caleb Harper, wasn't sentimental, just shrewd, mean, and desperate. And that's why, one brittle morning in February, he laid it out plain. "You'll marry Flora Grayson, or you'll lose this land." Jed didn't answer at first, just stood at the frosted window, jaw clenched. He'd heard the name before, Flora. Merchant's daughter. Reclusive. Rumors said she was odd. Large-boned. Rarely seen at town socials. A spinster by 26, they whispered. Caleb lit a cigar, the match hissing like venom. "Her daddy's gone, but the girl's got papers to that water tract east of here. We need it. She marries in, we tie the land up legal. Then maybe, just maybe, we keep this place." Jed didn't argue. He just nodded once, grunted, and walked out to saddle his horse. Inside, something twisted. Not anger, not pride. Something colder. Resignation. The wedding was small, rushed. Just Reverend Harlan, Caleb, and a few witnesses in the chapel by the river. Flora wore a dark green dress, not white, and met Jed's eyes without flinching. She spoke her vows clearly, without trembling. Her hands were dry and steady. Jed expected awkwardness. He expected silence. What he didn't expect was her eyes. Gray, sharp, unblinking, as if she were evaluating him like livestock. He was bitter. She was unreadable. Back at the ranch, they settled into silence. Separate beds, separate days. Jed worked the outer fences. Flora kept to the house. Weeks passed. Then, one morning, while fixing a gate, Jed saw her by the creek. She wasn't sketching flowers or sewing lace. She was hauling water, arms tense, face set. She moved with purpose, not grace. Later, when he came in for supper, there was stew on the stove, bread cooling by the hearth, and the bookshelves, long ignored, had been dusted. Ledger books lay open on the table. She had started recording everything. Cattle sold, hay bought, interest owed. Still, she didn't speak much. Neither did he. Then came the turning point. It was a cold Thursday in April. Flora had taken to walking the barn after breakfast, inspecting the place. Jed figured it was her way of staying busy. That afternoon, she found something he'd missed. A scrap of torn fabric, red and stained, caught beneath the hayloft ladder. Nearby, footprints. Small. Not a man's. She followed the trail to the back stall and found a boy. Curled up behind the bales, bruised, half-starved, barely conscious. 10, maybe 11. The son of a ranch hand. One who died last winter in a supposed accident. The boy was feverish. Rambled in broken whispers. Said his pa had tried to stop them from selling off the cattle without counting them. Said he'd seen papers burned in the stove. Names crossed out. Deals inked in secret. Flora didn't panic. She didn't call for Jed. She nursed the boy quietly, using old linens and willow bark tonic. When he was strong enough to sit up, she marched into the parlor, shut the ledger book and looked Jed in the eyes. "Your manager is stealing from you," she said. "And your father's business partner? He's planning to sell this land right from under you." Jed had looked at her like she'd grown horns. "And how the hell do you know that?" "Because I wasn't just raised behind a counter," she said. "My father taught me contracts, deeds, false accounting. I know how to follow a trail. And I've been watching the way men move on this land since the day I got here." Jed stared at her, not with suspicion but with something close to awakening. He didn't like being manipulated. He didn't like being pitted. But here was a woman who hadn't asked for his help, hadn't begged his affection. She saw the truth, spoke it, and handed him a choice. That night he opened the books, really opened them, saw the numbers that didn't add up. The cattle gone without record. The phantom hands paid for work they never did. He confronted Caleb, who waved it off. "You think Flora knows what she's talking about? She's got city hands. Let her bake bread, not run the ranch." But Jed saw it now. The long con, the land grab. His own blood planning to sign the water rights over to Otis Moreland, the same man who'd loaned them seed money years ago, now circling like a vulture. So Jed made a decision. For the first time in years, he stopped surviving and started fighting. He and Flora sat by lamplight, night after night, poring through every document. She taught him how to read the hidden clauses. He taught her where the land rose, where the fences bent. Together, they uncovered everything. Then Jed brought in outsiders, quiet men with eyes that missed nothing. One was a lawyer from Helena. Another, a land surveyor who knew Otis's signature by sight. They didn't bring guns. They brought truth. Jed and Flora became allies. Still quiet, still distant in some ways, but there was a rhythm to their partnership now. A respect forged in long days and longer nights. And one evening, as they reviewed the final stack of deeds, Jed looked at her and said, "When it comes to speaking the truth, let them hear it from you. If we die, let them know it was you who found the way." Flora didn't smile, but her eyes shone with something unspoken. They had one chance to stop the fraud. One chance to expose Otis Moreland and his allies. The plan was dangerous, but so was silence. And so they prepared for war, not with bullets but with evidence. But in the shadows, unseen hands were already moving. Otis wasn't stupid. He'd seen the mail change, seen the courier delay his visits. He had men in town, and someone, somewhere, had betrayed what Jed and Flora were planning. They didn't know it yet, but the fire had already been lit. It began with a torn handkerchief. Flora found it in the west stable, caught beneath a beam near the hay chute. Red checkered linen. Not hers, not Jed's. It was dirty, frayed at the edges, with something darker than mud clinging to one corner. She almost left it, but something about it, something out of place, made her pause. The barn was cold that morning. The horses hadn't been fed. The air held a strange hush. She followed the trail. A scuffed boot mark by the feed barrels, small and shallow. Then another near the tack wall. Whoever left them wasn't grown, maybe 12, maybe younger. And they weren't just sneaking through. They were hiding. Behind the stacked hay, in a narrow wedge of shadow, Flora found him. A boy, no more than 10. He didn't move at first, just crouched low, knees hugged to his chest, eyes glassy and wide. One arm trembled, his sleeve soaked in blood. His face was bruised, the kind of purple-black that told of more than just a fall. When she stepped closer, he flinched. "It's all right," she whispered, lowering herself to the straw. "I won't hurt you." He didn't speak, just stared. Dirt streaked his cheek, and his lip had split and crusted dry. Flora reached for the hem of her shawl and tore a strip. "Hold still." She touched his wound, and he gasped, more out of fear than pain. "It's shallow," she murmured, "but it needs cleaning." Still no words. Flora took him inside without telling Jed. Sat him by the hearth, warmed broth, and cleaned his arm as best she could. The boy didn't resist. He was too weak, too far gone. Just sat there, blinking slowly, breathing like someone who didn't know if he was allowed to. Jed came in halfway through. "What's this?" he asked, boots still covered in frost. The boy shrank back. Flora stood, protective. "He was in the barn." Jed frowned. "Who is he?" "Don't know. But he's hurt. Been hiding at least a day or two." They stared at each other. Jed rubbed his neck. "You checked with the hands? Maybe he's not one of ours." Jed crouched in front of the boy. "What's your name, son?" No answer. Flora knelt beside him again. "It's safe now. You can speak." And finally, in a voice barely more than a breath, "Micah, where are you from?" Jed asked. "Pa worked for a man near the South Ridge," the boy whispered. He found some papers. Said they were lying. Said they were stealing cattle. He tried to tell someone." "What happened?" Flora asked gently. "They found out." His chin trembled. "Pa's gone. They said if I told anyone, I'd be next." The room went still. Flora's voice was quiet. "Do you remember who said that?" Micah nodded slowly. "The manager. And another man. He called him Mr. Moreland." Jed stood upright. "Otis," he muttered. "Of course." That night they let Micah sleep by the stove. Flora made a bed of blankets and watched over him like a hawk. Jed sat near the window, one hand resting on his rifle. In the days that followed, Micah grew stronger. Still skittish, still silent most of the time, but his color returned. Flora made soup. Jed fixed a cot for him in the loft. They didn't press him with questions. Then one morning, as Jed returned from town, Flora met him in the yard. "Jed," she said, "we have to talk." He saw the fear in her face. Micah had told her everything. His father, Elias, a former ranch hand, had found discrepancies in the herd counts. Hundreds of heads gone, but never reported sold. Receipts destroyed. Names changed. He'd brought it to the ranch manager. That night he was found trampled. But Micah had seen what really happened. He'd watched Otis Moreland himself ride onto the ranch after dark. He'd heard them talking about how the land needed to change hands before the judge arrived. About making sure the boy didn't talk. He fled that night and made it to the Harper barn. Flora looked at Jed and said, "Your father's partner is preparing to sell this ranch, to claim Flora's water rights as abandoned property, with forged signatures and backdated documents." "And you believe him?" Jed asked. Flora nodded. "Every word." Jed didn't doubt her. "Not anymore." "I'll confront Otis," he growled. "No," she said. "You'll get yourself killed. That's not how we win." He hesitated. "Then how?" "We expose them." They started with the ledgers. Flora had memorized most of them, where the ink didn't match where the numbers skipped. Jed tracked down receipts. Old ranch hands came forward, quietly, with memories of stock counted twice, then gone. Flora wrote letters to legal men in Helena. Jed rode to River's Bluff to speak to a judge he once trusted. Within 2 weeks, they had more than suspicion. They had proof, but they also had a target on their backs. One night, they returned from the surveyor's office to find their kitchen torn apart. Ledgers missing. The barn door hanging loose. Flora's papers gone. Micah was gone too. Panic ripped through Jed. But then he found the boy safe, hidden in the root cellar. Flora had taught him where to go. She'd already known it would come to this. That night, they sat together at the kitchen table, lantern low, the house dark. Jed looked at her across the flame. "You've changed." "So have you," she replied. He took her hand. For the first time, she didn't pull away. They weren't husband and wife by arrangement anymore. They were something forged, sharper, realer. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, they planned for war. For most of his life, Jed Harper let the world happen to him. Not anymore. The morning after Micah's hiding place was nearly discovered, Jed sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee and a pistol on the table. He watched the sun rise over the eastern ridge and made a decision. No more running. No more reacting. If they were going to survive, he had to lead. He walked back inside, placed the pistol gently beside Flora's ledger, and said, "It's time." Flora didn't ask what he meant. She closed the book she'd been working on since dawn, tied her shawl around her shoulders, and stood. Together they began. First, the documents. They gathered what Otis Moreland's men had missed. Duplicates, hidden letters, old maps tucked inside the spine of her father's irrigation journals. A shipment ledger Flora had kept separate without telling Jed. Proof of cattle accounted for on paper but never delivered. Then the names. Jed made a list. Honest men who had no love for Otis. Former ranchers driven off their land. A deputy who'd lost his post after asking the wrong questions. A retired schoolteacher who once notarized Otis's contracts and had since fallen into silence. Not hired guns. Not thugs. Men with eyes for truth and hands that trembled from the weight of what they'd seen. They came slowly. Not all at once. But within a week, Jed had 5. Men who understood what was at stake. Men who owed him nothing. But Flora's presence, her clear voice, her quiet authority gave them reason to stay. They met at night, in the old smokehouse. Jed stood in the center, shoulder square, while Flora laid out the plan. "Otis is meeting with the land commissioner in 2 weeks," she said. "He'll present forged papers. He'll say we defaulted on water rights, that the property is abandoned or non-compliant. But we've found the truth." She held up the folder. Inside, maps, ledgers, affidavits, signed and sworn. "If we get this to Judge Anson before Otis does, publicly where he can't bury it, we stop the sale. We expose everything." One of the men, Marcus Hill, a farmer with ruined hands and a missing son, looked at Jed. "You really think it'll work?" Jed met his eyes. "No." A pause. "I think it's the only thing left worth trying." They nodded. The plan was set. Jed would ride north, file the affidavit at the county seat. Flora would stay with Micah and coordinate from the ranch. Their allies would spread the story quietly through town. That the Harpers were bringing evidence, that Otis Moreland's dealings weren't what they seemed. But they had to move fast. Too fast. Because Otis wasn't stupid. He felt it. The way people stopped speaking when he walked into the room. The way Jed no longer bowed his head. The morning Jed was set to leave, the courier they'd hired to deliver a sealed affidavit didn't show. His body was found by the river that evening. The papers were gone. That night, Jed didn't sleep. He stood in the barn, hands clenched, staring at the stall where he used to break wild colts. Flora found him there just before dawn. He was only 20, she said. Had a little sister in Helena. She waited for him every Friday. Jed didn't answer. "I can't keep watching this," she added softly. "Every time we get close, someone pays for it." He turned to her. "Then tell me to stop." She didn't. Instead, she stepped closer, pulled the folder from her satchel, and set it down. "I made another copy." He stared at it. "I knew they'd try to stop us," she said. "They always do." Jed opened the folder. The same maps, the same ledgers, the same truth. But this time, his name wasn't signed at the bottom. Hers was. "You should be the one to take it," he said. "No," she replied. "You're the one they fear. That makes you the one who should stand in front of them." He reached for her hand. "I never wanted this," he murmured. "I know," she said. "But maybe this is what you were made for." They left together the next day. Didn't tell anyone where they were headed. Didn't take the main road. Just Flora, Jed, Micah, and the truth. The plan was simple. Get to the judge before Otis could intercept them. But by nightfall, they saw smoke on the horizon. A warning. Otis knew. Someone had told him. They rode hard, avoided the towns, slept in the hills, ate little, said less. Micah kept close to Flora, eyes alert. Jed rode behind them, scanning the ridgelines. He'd grown into the role protector partner. Not just Flora's husband in name, but something deeper. Someone who bore her burdens without words. Then came the fire. 2 nights before they were to meet the judge, they returned to the ranch to collect final papers from Flora's safe. They saw the flames before they heard the shots. The barn gone, the porch collapsing, and in the smoke, voices. "They've got the map. Burn it all." Jed barely got Flora to the hatch before the roof caved. Bullets chased them through the tunnel beneath the house. An old prohibition smuggler's route her father had once used. They emerged behind the orchard, gasping for air. The ranch was gone, but the map still clutched in Flora's hands. They ran. Jed led them south, toward the old water tower, the train stop where the judge's circuit was due to pass in 48 hours. They had one chance left. Jed knew this wasn't survival anymore. It was sacrifice. They'd already lost the land, lost the house. If they lost Flora or the map, then they'd lose the only thing that still mattered, the truth. That night, in a hollow beneath the bluffs, Flora stitched Micah's torn shirt while Jed kept watch. He didn't speak until she finished. "They'll be waiting for us at the station. I know. They'll try to kill us. I know that too." He turned to her. "You should run." She looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You still don't understand, do you?" He didn't answer. "I came to this ranch thinking I was being traded. A name for some land. I stayed because I thought maybe I could help. But Jed, somewhere along the way, I stopped fighting for the ranch." She stepped closer, her voice a whisper. "I started fighting for you." And in that stillness, amid ashes and stars, they kissed for the first time. Not out of duty or fear, but out of shared defiance. They would face the fire together, whatever came next. They reached the rail station just before dawn. Clapboard shack. One platform. A rusted bell. The tracks ran straight and silent through the frost-covered valley. Flora clutched the folder to her chest. Micah stood close beside her, arms wrapped around himself. Jed watched the horizon, rifle slung across his back. The judge's train wouldn't arrive for another hour. That gave them too much time and not nearly enough. Jed scanned the empty hills. Nothing moved, yet he felt it, in his bones. Trouble wasn't coming. It was already here. They'd barely set foot on the platform when the sound came. Hooves, not fast, not charging, confident, casual. For riders at first. Then 6 more. Then another wave, flanking from the south. They didn't wear badges. They didn't speak. Just formed a slow arc around the station, rifles resting across their saddles, as if waiting for something. At the center rode a man in a long black coat, his gray hair tucked beneath a felt hat. A cane rested across his lap, untouched. His right hand never left the ivory grip of his revolver. Otis Moreland. His smile was almost tender. "Well now," he said. "Didn't think you'd make it this far." Jed said nothing, just stood, shoulders squared, eyes locked. Otis dismounted slowly. He walked like a man twice his age, but his presence was heavier than iron. "You know," he said, circling toward Flora, "I told your father once that kindness would kill him." Flora held her ground. "I see you inherited the better parts." Otis turned his eyes to Micah. The boy stiffened. "You," he said softly, "I should have finished the job when I had the chance." Jed stepped forward. Otis stopped smiling. "That's far enough, boy." "You're done, Moreland," Jed said. "We've got everything. Maps, contracts, affidavits. It's over." Otis's chuckle was like wind through dry leaves. "You still don't get it," he said. "You think this is about land? About water rights?" He leaned on his cane. "This is about power, about legacy, about making sure the future belongs to the people willing to burn a little to keep it." He gestured to his men. "They're not hired guns. They're ranchers, judges, bankers. This land doesn't care about justice. It cares about who's left standing." Jed's hand rested on his holster. Otis noticed. "You won't make it to that train." Behind him, one of the riders raised a torch. The station roof caught fire within seconds. Flames licked up the walls. Smoke curled through the beams. Micah cried out. Flora grabbed his hand and stepped back. Otis stepped forward. "Hand over the folder." "No," Flora said. Otis tilted his head. "I admire that. Truly." He raised his hand. The men took aim. Jed pulled Flora behind him, eyes sweeping the line of rifles. He recognized two faces, ranchers from the northern hills, men who'd once eaten at his mother's table. They looked away. Jed's voice was calm. "If we die here, every man in this valley will know why." "You think people care?" Otis asked. "They'll hear what I tell them, that you snapped, that you forged these papers, that you held this child hostage. They'll believe it, because I've been telling stories longer than you've been alive." He turned to Flora. "You're the last obstacle. The judge won't listen to a corpse." Then, before Jed could speak, a sound rang out. Whistles. Far off at first, then louder. The train. Otis turned sharply. The riders tensed. Jed whispered to Flora. "Now." She broke into a run, straight toward the platform edge. Bullets cracked the air. Jed drew and fired. Two men dropped from their saddles. Micah dove behind the water barrel. The train shrieked as it rounded the bend. Flora waved the folder above her head. "Stop!" she cried. "Federal papers. Witnesses. We have proof." The conductor saw her. The brakes screamed. Otis shouted, "Shoot her!" Jed tackled him before the shot could fire. They hit the dirt hard, Otis's revolver spinning away. Jed felt the crack of a boot against his ribs. One of the riders. Then another crack, this time from the train. 6 federal marshals jumped from the final car, rifles raised. "Drop your weapons," one shouted. Otis froze. His men hesitated, then fled. One was shot in the back. Another caught a bullet through the thigh. Jed stood, bleeding, panting. Otis knelt, hands raised, eyes blank. Flora clutched the folder, arm shaking. The lead marshal approached her. "Are you Flora Harper?" "Yes." He took the folder, flipped it open, eyes narrowing. "This is the commissioner's seal," he murmured. "Railroad land survey, water rights, fraud allegations." He turned to Otis. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction, and murder." Otis looked at Jed. "I warned you," he whispered. Jed said nothing. As the marshals dragged him away, the station continued to burn. But the truth, finally, had survived the flames. Ash fell like snow. The barn had burned to its bones. The porch lay in blackened splinters. The air still held smoke, acrid and sharp. And yet, through that haze, Flora stood, her dress torn, soot streaking her arms, holding the map like it was holy. Behind her, Jed helped Micah to his feet, the boy coughing through a rag. The gunfire had stopped. The riders had fled or been taken. And Otis Moreland, once so untouchable, was bleeding from the shoulder, hands bound, surrounded by marshals. Flora didn't watch him. She looked past the wreckage, beyond the station platform, where a train hissed and steamed. The door to the final car swung open. A tall man stepped out, black coat buttoned, silver badge glinting. His boots hit the platform like a judge's gavel. Jed whispered, "That's the commissioner." Flora didn't answer. She adjusted her grip on the folder and walked to meet him. The man surveyed the scene. His gaze moved over the ruins, the armed marshals, the rifles lying in the dirt. Then it settled on Flora. "You're Mrs. Harper?" he asked. She nodded. He extended a hand. "And this is the map?" She gave it to him. His eyes scanned the paper. He opened the folder, checked the documents, surveyor stamps, land grants, water records, each signed and notarized. One sheet bore his own seal. "This was approved by my office," he murmured. 6 months ago. The line was never meant to run through Harperland. Flora said nothing. She didn't need to. He looked at her again. "Otis Moreland told us otherwise. Claimed your water rights had lapsed. Claimed the ranch was abandoned." Jed stepped forward. "He killed a courier to stop this reaching you. And tried to kill us all," Flora added. The commissioner's jaw tightened. "Then I owe you more than an apology." He turned to the lead marshal. "This woman, her husband, and this child are now under federal protection. Escort them to safety. And as for Otis Moreland." He glanced at the older man, now slumped against a fence post, his face twisted in defiance. "He'll answer for everything." One of the marshals nodded, tightened the cuffs around Otis's wrists, and dragged him toward the train. Flora finally sat down on the edge of the platform. Her knees trembled beneath her skirt. Jed joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Micah leaned against her side, silent. They watched as the last of Otis's men were loaded onto the cars. Some were bruised. One limped. None spoke. The train hissed again, impatient to leave the valley. But before the commissioner boarded, he turned back to Flora. "I don't know what kind of woman could unravel a scheme Otis spent years building," he said. "But the Federal Railroad owes you a debt." Flora looked up at him. "I didn't do it alone." The commissioner nodded. "Still, your name will be in the report. The truth will be made public. The land is yours legally, permanently, and no man will ever touch it again without your say." Then he turned and was gone. The train groaned, coughed smoke, and began to move. Its steel wheels shrieked against the track, echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. And just like that, Otis Moreland disappeared into the east. When the train vanished beyond the ridge, the world went quiet. No more gunshots, no more flames. Only the wind, low and tired, sweeping through the valley as if it, too, had survived something. Jed stood with his hands on his hips, staring at the charred remains of the ranch house. The front door was gone. Smoke still curled from the roofline. The barn, reduced to ribs of blackened timber, leaned like a wounded thing. Fencing lay broken, as if a storm had come through. But the land itself remained. That stubborn, scarred soil had held their footsteps, had held fire and hoof and blood, and still it held them. Flora came to stand beside him. She had washed her hands, changed into a clean blouse, tied her hair back. But soot still clung to her collarbone, and her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. "Doesn't feel like a victory," Jed murmured. "No," she said, "but it's not a loss either." They stood like that for a while, side by side. Then she spoke again. "The commissioner said it'll go to hearing. Formal reviews. But the evidence is sound. The water rights are ours." Jed looked at her. "You don't need to stay." She turned to him, startled. "What?" "You did what you came here to do," he said. "You saved the ranch. Saved me." She stepped closer. "And you think that's the end of it?" He hesitated. Flora's voice dropped, softer now. "Jed Harper, we built something. Not just this land. Us." He looked down at his hands, burned, bruised, and still trembling. "I didn't know if I deserved any of this." "You don't get to decide what you deserve. You decide what you give. And what you gave, your courage, your trust, your name, it saved more than a ranch." She took his hand, dirt and all. Then Micah stepped out from behind the old well, dragging a bucket with both arms. His face was streaked with ash, but his smile was shy and proud. "Water's still clean," he said. Jed smiled. "Looks like the fire didn't touch everything." They walked to the creek together. By the water's edge, Flora knelt and dipped her hand in. "The spring's strong," she said. "We can build again." Jed crouched beside her. "We will." He looked over his shoulder, toward the distant curve of the new railroad line. "They'll need a stop near here," he said. "A station. Maybe even a depot." Flora nodded. "If we build a shelter near the creek, lay new fence, the land could support more than just cattle." She paused. "People could come, work, stay." Jed looked up at her. "You thinking about opening a business?" "I'm thinking about giving this place roots." Micah squatted nearby, skipping stones. "Can I stay too?" Flora glanced at Jed. He nodded. "You're already part of it, Micah." The boy beamed. They spent the rest of the day clearing debris, marking what could be salvaged. The well had held. The tool shed still stood. And in the cellar beneath the house, the seed chest Flora's father had built was untouched. Wheat, beans, wildflower roots, life. As evening fell, the three of them sat near the foundation of the old house. Jed passed around tin cups of coffee. Flora had wrapped a blanket around Micah's shoulders, and the boy dozed quietly, leaning against her. You really think we can rebuild? Jed asked. Flora looked at the stars. I don't think, she said. I know. Then, after a long silence, she added, Otis tried to destroy this place with lies. You saved it with the truth. That's something we can build on. Jed looked at her. His wife. His partner. The firelight caught the gold thread in her hair. And for the first time in years, Jed Harper felt something settle inside him. Not peace. Not yet. But hope. Strong enough to grow roots. 6 months later. Snow melted slow in Montana. But when it did, the land woke with a kind of grace. Jed Harper stood on the new porch, one hand resting on the cedar beam he'd planed himself. The sun crested the hills, touching the fields with gold. The smell of sawdust still clung to the railings. Below, the cattle moved in slow circles, healthy again, no longer counted by thieves. Tracks gleamed in the distance, steel veins stretching toward something larger. The train came twice a week now, and soon, they said, it would be daily. A wooden sign stood near the creek bed, Harper Station. He'd protested the name. Flora hadn't. She said the truth deserved roots. From where he stood, Jed could see the small depot they'd built. Just one room and a flagpole, but it was enough. Enough for travelers to rest, for freight to stop, for new names to find their way into the valley. Inside the house, Micah was setting kindling. The boy had grown taller and steadier. He still carried the scar above his brow, but he no longer flinched at raised voices or shadowed riders. His lessons came by post from Helena now, and sometimes he'd read aloud while Flora worked. Flora. Jed turned as she stepped onto the porch. She wore a denim skirt, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, clipboard in hand. She was directing 2 carpenters by the station, calling out measurements with calm authority. She'd changed, but not in the way people meant when they whispered about a woman's figure. She had slimmed, yes, labor does that, but it wasn't her waist Jed noticed. It was her walk, her voice, her steadiness. She was no longer the hidden daughter of a forgotten merchant. She was the spine of the valley. Flora caught him watching. She smiled. Something wrong, Mr. Harper? He shook his head. Just trying to remember when I started breathing easier. She walked to him, laid the clipboard down, and leaned against the porch rail. You think it's over? She asked. I think the worst of it is. They looked out over the land together. In the past months, Otis Moreland had stood trial. 3 ranchers testified. So did the judge who'd nearly signed away the Harper rights. One by one, the pieces Flora had uncovered came into the light. Otis was sentenced to 20 years. Some said it should have been more. Others said he'd be dead before 5. Jed didn't much care. Justice had arrived, slow and heavy-footed. But it had arrived. And in its place, they'd built something better. People had begun to drift in. A blacksmith's family. A widow with 2 sons. An ex-sheriff looking for quiet. They came because the land was fair, and because the woman who ran it didn't cheat. Jed turned to Flora. What do we do when Harper Station becomes more than we can handle? She raised an eyebrow. Hire more hands. Expand the depot. Teach others what we've learned. And if trouble comes back? She took his hand. Then we remind it whose name is on the sign. They stayed like that for a while, watching the light change, hearing the distant whistle of the 9:15. And for once, there was no fear in Jed's chest. No anger either. Just gratitude. Not because they'd won, but because they'd endured. Because one woman had spoken the truth when no one else would, and one man had finally listened.